Could Kenny Pickett be the Denver Broncos franchise quarterback of the future in this year's NFL draft? Are there concerns about his hand size? Should Broncos fans invest in that narrative that's ongoing? And what trait does Kenny Pickett have to him that helps negate that? We talk about that and much more and how he fits with the Denver Broncos on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network. Your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked On Network and 9 News. Broncos country, hope you're doing well on this beautiful day in Broncos country, wherever you are at. Thank you for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. You can get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format. You can watch us in 4K high definition on YouTube. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss out on any days worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage every single day, all year long, because for the true fan, there is never an offseason. Sayre, my friend, hey, it's great to see you here once again. There's a lot of buzz right now throughout this week. The NFL Scout and Combine, this year's quarterback class we've talked about. We continue our prospect profile series here on Pitt quarterback Kenny Pickett. Now, out of all the quarterbacks that we've discussed, there's a lot of focus here on Pickett in particular at the Scout and Combine. Is he worth the 9th pick? Let's dive into it.
I can't wait to talk about it, Cody. Absolutely. Kenny Pickett is somebody that obviously everybody's going to have in focus here at the Scouting Combine for, 2 particular reasons. I was going to say one particular reason, but, the hand size is obviously a big deal. But, man, it just feels like the consensus right now seems to be that there's no quarterback worth a top 10 draft pick, at least from people that really, they get paid to evaluate these prospects or people that are, NFL draft experts. And ultimately, that could mean absolutely nothing. I think the 2019 draft, outside of Kyler Murray, I don't know that anyone necessarily expected Daniel Jones to go as high as he did. So every year there's going to be surprises. It only takes one team to fall in love with a guy. So you have to imagine that these interviews and the process at the Combine is especially critical for a guy like Kenny Pickett. And obviously, teams may have concerns over the hand size, but I think everything else, he checks the boxes. So it's such a fascinating thing. It's like we're bringing up the Kyler Murray discussion again, or it's like we're bringing up discussions about other QBs that have been to this or to that to play quarterback in the NFL. So I don't know, the discussion of whether he's worth pick number 9 is a fascinating one.
Well, I mean, it is because I think that the consensus amongst various draft analysts is kind of split on this quarterback class. Who's QB1? I mean, some people have Kenny Pickett, some have Matt Corral, some have Malik Willis, some have Carson Strong, Desmond Ridder. I mean, it goes on and on. There is no consensus number 1 guy in the eyes of many draft analysts. And I think that's definitely, it's interesting. But I also think it's a good thing too, Sayre, because it's hey, any one of these guys could have the potential, as we've talked about. It's not about who they are right now. It's about maybe what an organization can envision them to become. And, Ray really got a lot out of Nathaniel Hackett appearing on Good Morning Football. Very coy on the Aaron Rodgers thing because Peter Schrager obviously, said, hey, I know we can't talk about him potentially being in Denver, but, your thoughts on Aaron, and Hackett's just like, man, I'm just excited, happy for him. He's a great guy. But then the focus for Nathaniel Hackett then shifted to the fact that, hey, we have to focus on the quarterback position. It's going to be the most important part of our offseason and our team going forward. And so you have to wonder, with a guy like Kenny Pickett, I mean, he has some of these traits to him. He definitely has swagger. He's a playmaker. There was even that reference, too, that you made here in the show notes where there was that fake slide maneuver that he did in one of the football games that immediately the very next day or a couple days after that game prompted the NCAA to say, hey, you cannot fake slide because it's hey, defenders can't hit you if you're sliding. So he did the fake slide, and I don't know how he didn't tear every ligament in his knee by doing that. But, man, he is athletic as can be. He can run the football. He's got that swagger to him, man. And you know what? I think if you have swagger and you can play, yes, we're talking about hand size. We'll address that a little bit deeper, later on here in the show. But it's this guy can play. And I think at the end of the day, Sayre, if I'm an NFL GM, that's the only thing I care about. Can you play? And I think if you're in a locker room, the player's going to be can you play? I mean, I think it's evident based on what we've seen on his tape. He can play football.
He can. And man, if you're not getting rules created based on the plays that you're making out there on the field, I mean, what are you doing with your life as a football player, right? But in all seriousness, I mean, that kind of stuff is crazy to see from Kenny Pickett. I think like the hand size discussion has gotten so overblown that it's like it's completely drowned out all the rest of his game, which is actually really impressive. I mean, during the season, we're talking about this guy as maybe the next Joe Burrow with the way that he was slinging the ball around for Pitt. And of course, there are a lot of parallels there. And I think people will scoff at those kind of comparisons just because it's like, well, he's not Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow made the Super Bowl his second season, yada, yada. But there's a lot of things that are very similar about these two guys, not the least of which is the fact that Pickett obviously had the breakout season this past year, or at least the season in which he went from being a day 3 type of guy to potentially being in the first round discussion. I don't think that can be overstated either, Cody, as we look at Kenny Pickett, as he went from a day 3 borderline undrafted prospect to being a first round guy. And I think that that's kind of the consensus, is that if there is a quarterback that's a consensus first round player, I think a lot of people would agree it's Kenny Pickett. And so the reasons for that there's a variety of them. And I know we're going to get into that as we talk about kind of the details of his game. But I think the number one thing that you see when you watch him play, I mean, this guy's a playmaker, and almost at times to a fault. Like, it's not like he's a scrambling quarterback, but he's able to avoid pressure. He's able to get out of the pocket and make throws on the run, make throws on the move. He's able to do all of these different things. When you watch him, I mean, he throws with anticipation. He always is looking downfield. There's a play from this past season that I watched that was really impressive to me. I mean, he is getting hit in the backfield. He's getting hit and he's having to roll out to his left and kind of put his back to the defense. And as he does, he's got a defender bearing down on him. But as he's running away from the pressure, he's looking downfield the entire time, not worried at all about the defender that's bearing down on him. That's the kind of guy that I think when you talk about like the traits that the Broncos are looking for in a quarterback, which we'll get into in this episode, I feel like those are the types of things that you want to see from a guy, just a playmaker at the QB position, somebody who's not going to take a ton of unnecessary risks with the football, but still somebody that can go out there and when the play breaks down, he can make things happen.
Pickett had 5 years of college football game tape. How does that project maybe to the NFL level? We get into the player prospect profile series with Kenny Pickett coming up here in just a moment here on Locked On Broncos. But before we do that, let me tell you about BetOnline.net, the sponsor of today's episode of Locked On Broncos. Now, football season is over, but college basketball, pro basketball is in full steam right now, and BetOnline is the place to be from all the latest odds, totals, player performance props. BetOnline is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs this season, all year long. And BetOnline, they remain the best spot, Sayre, for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net has you covered with hockey, boxing, and UFC, and even Olympic coverage. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action today. BetOnline, where the game starts. Diving a little bit deeper in today's episode of Locked On Broncos on Pitt quarterback Kenny Pickett. Could he eventually be the Broncos quarterback of the future? I think it's certainly an option right now. We talk about 5 years of college tape here for Kenny Pickett at Pitt. I mean, for him, I think that's great. And one of the answers he had this week when he met with the media at the Combine, people kept bringing up the hand size. And yes, so let's get the hand size thing out of the way. 8.5 inches. That's half an inch, less than what Joe Burrow did. And Joe Burrow was getting mocked for his hand size as well. But here's the deal. Okay, we know this guy can play, and he's got 5 years of game tape to prove that he can play football. And you don't believe me here. His career passing yards at Pitt, for a guy who apparently has really small hands, 12,303 total career passing yards at Pitt, 81 touchdowns to 37 interceptions there. Not to mention a 67% completion percentage as a thrower in 2021, 4,300 yards there, 42 touchdowns to 7 interceptions last season. Oh, for a guy that has 8.5-inch hands, apparently that is a concern as to whether or not he can play football. The kid can flat out play. So I think we definitely got to dive into this a little bit more. Is it a turnoff, in your opinion, Sayre, all the conversation about hand size for Broncos fans? I think this is a question we want you to answer as well. Does this turn you off the idea of Kenny Pickett? Because, Sayre, I think when we talk about this hand size argument and narrative here with Kenny Pickett, I feel like it's that one thing that people see on Twitter. They see it in an article. It's the low-hanging fruit. And when you think of Kenny Pickett, it's like, oh, small hand size. Don't go with him. I think it's very unfair to the player and what we've seen Kenny Pickett do on tape.
I think it is too, really. I mean, you talk about a half an inch. I mean, I don't know how to really put that up against the screen here, but I mean, it's not much. Like when you're talking about half an inch between Kenny Pickett and Joe Burrow, and Burrow, obviously, remember he had that funny tweet where he's like, well, I guess I'm going to consider retiring now because I don't know if I can play football with my tiny hands. And I think Kenny Pickett has to have that same kind of, cockiness, confidence, arrogance, whatever you want to talk, however you want to word that, or whatever word you want to attach to that. I think he has to have that same kind of confidence when he's coming in. He's like, look, like, I don't care if I have to play with gloves on. I don't care if you want me to play without gloves. Like, I'm going to get the job done for you. Look at what I did this past season. I mean, how many other quarterbacks have come through Pitt since the early 80s, Cody? I would say quite a few. None of them have broken Dan Marino's passing records besides Kenny Pickett. So Kenny Pickett is the one who's got that on his ledger. I mean, there's a lot of things. And we heard from the Senior Bowl, he was the most impressive interview of all the quarterbacks as well. So you just kind of put all these different things together. And is the hand size thing a turnoff? I think to a degree, I know for me personally, I'd be lying if I said, well, it's not a concern to me at all, because it's kind of bordering on the unprecedented stage. I don't think anybody has started in the NFL with under 9-inch hands since somebody was saying Michael Vick. I don't know if that's completely accurate, but that would make sense. But at the same time, like, the guy can play 42 touchdown passes compared to 7 interceptions, 4,300 yards. The one area, Cody, where it might concern you is in terms of fumbles. He had a lot of fumbles
Yeah.
at Pitt in his career, but at the same time, how often are you going to be getting hit, at the NFL level? Are you going to be getting hit all the time from behind, or are you anticipating that if you're an NFL executive making this pick? I think that's the one concern for me.
Well, I think that when you look at a quarterback being under center too, right? You're here, like it's kind of open, right? It's like, hey, once that ball hits the middle of your hand here, and it looked like Dragon Ball Z for a moment here on the screen, but it's like, hey, when you snap the ball, can you grip it? Now, here's the thing about Kenny Pickett that we talked about like a couple months ago here on the show. He actually is double jointed on his thumb on his throwing hand, so he actually has the ability to contort his thumb to wrap underneath and around the ball that allows him to get a better grip on it. So it's like, hey, that can help mitigate maybe the concern about hand size. But, I do think that's a valid point. Being able to grip the football and hold on to it is really good. Like, if he doesn't turn the football over by throwing interceptions, you have to make sure he doesn't fumble the football as well. What was the concern about Daniel Jones? Daniel Jones protect the football from interceptions primarily, but he had a lot of issues fumbling, and that's translated into his NFL career here. So I do think there's one thing that we should look at there. And look, 38 career fumbles in 5 years, that is a little bit of a concern. And that's something that NFL GMs and executives are going to want cleaned up, Sayre, if he is going to be a franchise quarterback. But I do think that when we watch him on tape, it's hard to really ignore how well he can throw the football, how well he can create plays out of structure. I mean, we talk about a guy, we were talking about Malik Willis on yesterday's episode of the show, the narrative where he can hold on to the ball a little too long, and he kind of puts himself in opportunities that kind of take away chances for him to make plays because he's so athletic, because he's so versatile. Kenny Pickett, I think, is really good off design, as you mentioned, being wrapped up, having the defender bearing down him, still looking downfield to try to make a play happen. That is what we're talking about there. He can do a lot of these things really well.
He does. And speaking of Malik Willis, a few years ago, Cody, people would be talking about a 6 foot tall quarterback coming out they would be talking about Malik Willis's size. There's been so many guys that have now come into the league that have kind of debunked that myth that you have to be, certain height, like 6'2" or taller, to succeed in the NFL. So maybe Kenny Pickett can be part of like a wave of people. I don't know. There's not a ton of quarterbacks that don't have big hands in general, but I mean, maybe he can be part of this wave of kind of erasing kind of, hey, you can't play if you have, below 9-inch hands in the NFL. I mean, maybe that's kind of an archaic thing. I think as you talked about, you don't see it pop up with him as an issue as a passer. And like I do with many other things, Cody, I look at what other professional, evaluators are saying, like Daniel Jeremiah and Lance Zierlein of NFL.com and, Dane Brugler. And you look at all these people and they don't say that they see any issues with his throwing in terms of like hand size. And there's a lot of people on Twitter who will bring up, well, what about, cold weather games and things like that?
Pitt.
To be honest, yeah, Pitt. He played at Pitt. And that's obviously, it doesn't get much harsher than the upper Northeast in terms of weather situation. But then you're talking about coming and playing in Denver where you have, road game against the Kansas City Chiefs. That's really your only annual trip that's like, hey, that could be a really, rough conditions, cold weather game. even playing in Denver, a lot of the times we see in December, even January, the temperature is in the 50s, in the 60s. I mean, I pay attention to that stuff because I think about, remember with Peyton Manning, the cold weather games. I'm like, it's not even really that cold in Denver, but I guess below 32 degrees, Peyton Manning became, the worst quarterback in the NFL. So, and that just points to the fact you could bring up any statistic or any argument that you could say, well, in NFL history, nobody with this, hand size has done this. And people did that for Peyton Manning. People did that for Kyler Murray coming out of Oklahoma. People did that for Baker Mayfield coming out of Oklahoma. It's just a ton of different examples of what you can't do because it's never been done before in the NFL. I feel like Kenny Pickett is, poised to kind of debunk that myth, at least in terms of his own personal hand size.
Would Kenny Pickett be a great pick and a great fit here for this Denver Broncos team in 2022? Sayre and I, we answer that question coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about the other sponsor. Today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, that's our good friends over there at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market today. The bars are covered in 100% milk chocolate. When you take a bite into them, they're soft, they're easy to chew, and you can get your hands and your taste buds on a box of Built Bar today by going to Built.com. See the amazing 9 original flavors that they do have, plus the occasional limited time flavor that they also offer every single month on Built.com. And if you need a little bit extra fuel to help get yourself through the day, you just got done with a workout, you're getting ready to work out, take a bite into Built Bar because it contains 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. For something that's covered in 100% milk chocolate, that is fantastic value. So go to Built.com right here today. Find a box, find a flavor that you and your family love. And when you go to checkout, make sure you use promo code LOCK15. That'll get you 15% off your next order at Built.com. All right, sir, as we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. Once again, Broncos country, thank you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day. We've gotten some amazing reviews on Apple Podcasts for people who love the show. And if you love Lockdown Broncos, it would mean the world to both Sayre, Bedinger, and myself if you could go to Spotify, leave us a 5-star review. If you could go to Apple Podcasts, write a review, leave a 5-star review, tell us why you tune in every single day. Use your Twitter handle in your review description, and we will be happy to enter you into any future Broncos contest giveaway that we have coming up. We are approaching 6,000 subscribers here on YouTube, Sayre, so we may have to do a giveaway once we get to 6,000. We're just about maybe 40 or 50 away. So Broncos country, thank you so much for all the love, all the support that you've shown us all throughout the year. We have you covered every single day, all year long, because for true Broncos fans, there is never an off season, and we're glad to have you covered here. All right, hey, continuing on with our conversation here today, Sayre, would Kenny Pickett be a great fit here for the Denver Broncos? I think when we talk about traits, measurements, he's a 6'3", 220-pound quarterback. 6'3", 220 pounds. That's an ideal build. It's not too short. I know there was a narrative, especially with Kyler Murray, about him being way too short. If I'm not mistaken, John Elway actually said something, I think, in the pre-draft process about Kyler Murray's height and how important it is to be tall under center. So, we've kind of seen that narrative kind of debunked a little bit by Murray. Murray's done a fantastic job in the NFL so far. But going back, he's already met with the Broncos. He's already met with George Paton, Nathaniel Hackett, and obviously the scouting staff, the front office executives in the 15-minute meeting window that he had. The meeting apparently went really well. But, thinking about Nathaniel Hackett's offense, what we've seen at Pitt, do you think he can be a really good fit here for this offense? And I'm eager for your thoughts, especially on what one key draft analyst has to say about him.
Well, I think just off the cuff, I think yes, a good fit for the offense, and definitely just when you look in terms of size, when you look in terms of athleticism, all those different traits, to be able to get outside the pocket and make plays, we've seen that. To be able to play within the structure of the offense that does like the wide zone, the play pass, and things like that. He does those things. He can get the ball vertical. He can do everything that you ask for from the quarterback position. So I would say just in terms of those traits, absolutely yes. And there is a guy that I think, I listen to him a lot, and I think everyone in Broncos country should, because he's a smart guy and he knows what he's doing. He's worked in an NFL team. He works with NFL teams.
Ozzie Newsome.
Ozzie Newsome, absolutely. So he's learned from the best of the best. Daniel Jeremiah, I'll continue to bring up his analysis and his, player fits or projections and things like that. The reason why is because not only does he, do this for his main job, he works as though he's the general manager of NFL.com, but he also works for the Los Angeles Chargers. So when a guy who works for the Los Angeles Chargers as, color commentary on the radio, things like that, when he says Kenny Pickett's a good fit for the Denver Broncos, he's being genuine, right? I mean, I don't know that he necessarily has a bias to the Chargers, but at the same time, he sees plenty of the Broncos. He sees exactly, he evaluates all these offenses and all these different things. And so he knows what Nathaniel Hackett's offense is supposed to look like, and he knows what a quarterback is supposed to look like to fit that offense. And so I think it's worth mentioning that Daniel Jeremiah said of the quarterbacks in this class, Kenny Pickett is the best fit.
Daniel Jeremiah might be the one guy I probably invest the most into what he says. When he releases like his official mock draft, not just like the hundreds he releases building up, but like his last official one, that's the one I take the most stock in here because he is so well plugged into different NFL organizations. I mean, as you mentioned, he's essentially the general manager of NFL.com. He's doing so much. Now, he did appear on the Pat McAfee show earlier this week. And interesting enough, he said, this one year, I actually gave all my material to my 13-year-old son. I said, hey, here's the teams. Here's the needs that they have. Here's the prospects. Here's all the work that I did. Good luck. And his son put together his mock draft. So that right there, I think, really cool to be able to utilize that. But I mean, I think when there's people who talk about prospects, there's probably nobody more trusted, well plugged in, not just at the NFL level, but I mean, the guys when the draft portion is coming up, like literally right after free agency, the month building up to it, we're going to see Daniel Jeremiah bring on specific people from the colleges that some of these players played at, and he's going to get interviews with those guys. They do a deep dive, and obviously the Move the Sticks podcast is such a fantastic listen. So after you're done listening to Lockdown Broncos, folks, please go over, listen to Move the Sticks podcast. Anything he has to say on these quarterback prospects, listen, because he's invested in, and he is on record. I mean, he had his conference call last week, Sayre, where he said, hey, there might be one quarterback that gets taken in the top 32 of this year's NFL draft. So it's like that right there, I think, has people a little bit uneasy about whether or not to go and select quarterback. But, man, there's other teams out there right now. Carolina's said to be looking to be aggressive at quarterback this year. Tennessee's looking to the eventual successor of Ryan Tannehill. Not somebody's going to come in and upend him, but somebody that can start eventually when Ryan Tannehill hangs it up. There's going to be teams out here in this year's draft that need a quarterback. The Pittsburgh Steelers, for example. So Denver has to really evaluate, do they really want to maybe try to go out and get a guy here at number 9, or do they have to maybe take a risk and see if one of these other teams decide to take one of these quarterbacks in round 1? Like I said, it's going to be a very interesting gauntlet here, Sayre. And look, this isn't even the first thing we have to deal with here. Free agency is legitimately coming up in 2 weeks' time, where both Sayre Bedinger and myself, we're going to have Broncos country covered with free agency frenzy. What type of moves will the Broncos make? Could they make a big splash? We do know that AFC West division rival Los Angeles Chargers, they're rumored to be going all in on free agency with the amount of cap space, $57 million to be exact. They're going to go all in while Justin Herbert's on a rookie deal. So for the Denver Broncos, they can't sit and wait around. Those teams are going to reload. They have to find a way to answer the quarterback position by any means necessary. It will be super important. So with that said, Sayre Bedinger, I hope you have a great weekend, my friend. It's always great talking football with you. Broncos country, hope you have an amazing weekend as well. We have a lot to break down. We're going to have more prospect profile series coming up here on the podcast. But even we're going to talk about on Monday's episode of the show, Melvin Gordon, very candid about wanting to come back to the Denver Broncos. He says that there's some unfinished business. You get that and much more on Monday's episode of Locked On Broncos.